You'll hear from a machine learning scientist, entrepreneur, and the author of the best-selling memoir, Girl Decoded, who will illuminate a path toward humanizing technology before it dehumanizes us. Please welcome to the stage Rana el Kaliouby, Deputy CEO of SmartEye, co-founder of Affectiva, and advocate of the ethical deployment of artificial intelligence. She will be interviewed by Katie Johnston, a reporter from the Boston Globe. Welcome.
All right.
Hi.
Hello. Okay,
Hi.
we're working. All right. You're
Move
kind of far away
closer
from each
to
other.
you. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of weird not being on Zoom, right? Being in person.
I know. Yeah.
People, so,
Crazy.
Hi, everybody.
Well, Rana, I wondered if you could start just by telling us a little about the technology that you developed and how your company uses it. Easy, quick question, right? Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I spent the last 20 plus years building artificial emotional intelligence. So if you look at human intelligence, your IQ matters, your cognitive intelligence matters, but actually your emotional intelligence matters even more, both in your personal and your professional lives. And you know, the whole day today has been about kind of how do you connect with people on your team, how do you lead people with empathy. And so when I started looking at the field of, like technology and specifically AI, I realized that a lot of the emphasis on AI was on the IQ of the AI. And no one was really paying attention to building human-centric AI and emotional intelligence into our machines. So that set me on a journey of building EQ into our technology and our devices.
Okay, great. And then how does Affectiva use that?
Yeah, so initially I started all of this in academia. So I was at Cambridge University doing my PhD and then came to MIT as a postdoc. The core technology essentially uses any camera sensor on your device to read your facial expressions. So it could recognize if you're smiling or you're frowning or you look interested or not. And there are many, many applications of it. The first application we explored at MIT was for autistic kids. So we did a lot of work with kids on the autism spectrum, helping them understand nonverbal signals. And then while at MIT, we started to get a lot of interest from kind of the Media Lab members who wanted to license the technology. So Fortune 500 companies like Bank of America, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Toyota. So that provided the impetus for spinning out of MIT, starting Affectiva. And we've brought a number of products to market. Like one of our key products is an advertising testing solution or a video testing solution. So we measure and quantify how people respond to video advertisements or Netflix TV series. We can see if you're nodding your head, if you look interested, or if you're being sentimental. And that information is really key to driving media buying decisions and a lot of other business decisions. So that's one use case.
Okay, all right. And you've kind of become an expert at people's facial expressions, right?
Right.
Because that's what it's all about. Can you talk a little bit about a certain facial expression and what it means? Like something that we might not understand, like a smile, you're happy, but are there any?
Oh, even the smile is complex. So we'll geek out on that for a moment. So it turns out we have about 45 facial muscles that create thousands, they can combine to create thousands of emotional and mental state expressions. So back in the 70s, this guy, Paul Ekman, and his team, there was a show called Lie to Me. Have you ever watched that? It was a while back. It was based on his research. So he mapped every facial muscle. He called it an action unit. So a brow furrow is this corrugator muscle. It's what you don't want to have, You could remove it by Botox. But basically, this is action unit 4. And it maps to a brow furrow, which tends to be a negative expression. If you're confused or if you're angry, you tend to do that. The smile is the zygomatics muscle, and that's action unit 12. So he developed this coding system, and it takes about 100 hours to become a certified face reader. So I'm a certified face reader, so if you're sitting across the table with me at dinner, I'm like scrutinizing your expression.
Don't lie to you, right?
Yeah. So you become, a certified face reader, and then it takes you about 5 minutes to code every minute of video. So if I wanted to watch a political debate, for example, and code what the different, faces are telling us, it's very time-consuming and laborious. So instead, we use computer vision and machine learning and deep learning and tons of data. Like we gather data of people smiling and frowning and smirking, and we train these algorithms to do that basically in real time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you wrote this really great book, Girl Decoded, and you talked a lot about your journey, your personal journey. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your personal history, your journey, I think you called it from a nice Egyptian girl to an American tech CEO. I think it's really interesting, so I'd love for you to tell these guys about it.
So I was born in Cairo, Egypt. I'm Egyptian American now. But my parents were both in technology, and so we moved around the Middle East, and I remember like huddling alongside my two younger sisters and trying an Atari video console, or my dad used to have these like really huge camcorders, and we like technology brought us apart, and that's always fascinated me, how technology can help divide us, but also bring us together and connect us in really interesting ways. So yeah, I grew up around the Middle East in a very my parents were both conservative and very traditional, but at the same time, they really supported our education. And I studied computer science as an undergraduate and was adamant that I had a very clear roadmap for my career. I wanted to go abroad, get a PhD, come back to Egypt, and teach. And so sure enough, I got a scholarship to go to Cambridge University and do my PhD, and that just opened my eyes to the art of the possible. I didn't want to go back. I became very passionate about this research, and very serendipitously towards the end of my time at Cambridge, I met this MIT professor, Rosalind Picard, who started the field of affective/emotional computing. And she invited me to be a postdoc in her lab. Funny aside, before my PhD, I had just gotten married, and my Egyptian husband at the time, he's my ex now, yes, he basically, I basically told Ross Picard, the MIT professor, I was like, but there's a husband waiting for me back in Egypt. I ought to go back home. And she said, commute from Boston to Cairo. So I started a 3-year commute between Cairo and Boston. It was insane. And then spun out Affectiva.
Right, okay. Well, and so can you talk a little bit more about, so you call this emotion AI, I think. Did you coin that term? Okay.
We did.
So can you talk a little bit more about what drew you to that and why you think it's important, and maybe a little bit more about what emotion AI is?
Yeah, so if you look at how humans communicate, only 10% of our communication is based on the actual words we use.
10%?
Yeah, only 10%. 90% is nonverbal.
Wow.
And it's split equally between your facial expressions, your hand gestures, your body posture, and your vocal intonation. The prosodic features of your voice, how much energy is in your voice, how, the pauses, the pitch. And that's actually how we, that's the information we use in our face-to-face conversations to derive, information about a person's level of engagement, loyalty, trust. So it's really important in our human-to-human connections. But when you move to a digital environment, you lose all of that.
Right.
And I'll actually give an example. Like over the past, 2 years, I've been doing a lot of virtual talks where I can't see the audience, right? Like often, we're in a conversation together and you can't see the audience. You can't riff off the energy in the room. And it's really hard. So it's a real gift to be able to see you guys and kind of, see you smile in real time or react in real time.
Yeah.
And so we miss that in the digital environment, and we're trying to build technology that can quantify that. So there's a company called Read.ai. I'm not affiliated with them, but they are literally doing this. They're quantifying all of this nonverbal communication in meetings or, video events or live events. So they can say, this was the level of engagement, the energy was positive, or there was like a really, or this person is hogging all the airtime and not giving opportunity to other people to speak.
And what are they looking at, voice or?
And face.
And face,
yeah,
together.
They're doing both, yeah.
Okay. And it seems to be a growing field. There's some companies that I've written about before that we talked about, Cogito, that use voice intonation, and they use it in like call center software. They can get people to slow down talking or say like, this person's having an emotion, you need to respond to it. What other types of emotion AI is out there that you're most interested in?
Yeah, so we focus on the face or computer vision in general, but as you said, there are other companies that focus on the voice as a channel. So Cogito is another MIT spin-out. They're Boston-based, and they are focused on the call center space. So, if an angry customer calls in, they're able to detect that using the technology in real time and escalate that to, a call center representative or agent. Other companies, so my company just got acquired over the summer by a Swedish publicly traded company called SmartEye. And right after our acquisition, we bought another company called iMotions, and they're focused on multimodal analysis of emotion signals. So they combine things like eye tracking, facial expressions, vocal or voice analysis, but even things like brainwave analysis, right? Or skin conductance, like physiological signals, like your level of sweat.
And, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so the idea is to combine as many sensors and signals as you can to get a really full picture of the person's emotional or mental state.
And that's what you're trying to do with these companies that you're acquiring is measure every type of emotion you can be
Exactly.
having. Wow. Well, so obviously there are pitfalls in this, right? Interpreting facial expressions and how people feel. There's differences between cultures, as well as biases that humans build in without knowing it. Can you talk a little bit about some of those dangers that you face in this very fraught kind of endeavor?
Yeah, like a lot of the AI space, it can be a double-edged sword, right? Like this technology, and I've, even though I'm very passionate about some of the use cases, and, we can talk about the applications of this in mental health and even like employee engagement and automotive, there are pitfalls, and there are areas where as a company, we've really stayed away from deploying this technology. So I like to think of the ethical kind of development and the ethical deployment of AI. On the ethical development side, the biggest problem is data and algorithmic bias. So for example, if I train a smile algorithm on mostly, middle-aged white men, it's not going to recognize people who look like me. So the diversity of the data becomes really key. And so far, we have about 12 million facial responses from 90 countries around the world, which is about 5 billion facial frames.
Wow.
So the key is to be able to sample this data in a smart way to ensure that we have representation of age ranges, genders, ethnicities, even things like appearances, right? Like glasses or facial masks. We have to go back and retrain all of our algorithms with people wearing facial masks.
Wow, yeah. How do you even do that? Just the eyes? Can you get...
Some expressions are easier to get than others. Like even when you smile, actually, if it's a true smile, you engage your wrinkles. Exactly. Yeah. So that was okay. But yeah, some other expressions are just harder to detect.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And haven't there been companies that approached you for some of your technology that you shied away from, like security companies or spying on people, or what have you said no to, and how do you draw the line?
So when we spun out of MIT, Roz, my co-founder, the MIT professor, and I sat around her kitchen table in her house, like 30 minutes away from here, and we said, okay, how are we going to make decisions on which industries to deploy our technology and in which industries to not? And we came up with a number of core values. So, we're committed to consent. We want people to always be very clear that there's a camera there, that this data is being collected, and to have a true understanding of how the data is being used. We also decided on, the integrity of the science. Like, could we really actually make an accurate inference of your state based on, the context you're in? So a number of factors like that, and that meant that there were industries we decided to steer away from. So very early on, we said we were not going to do any work in the surveillance and security and lie detection space. But then fast forward, so this was 2009 when we spun out. In 2011, we were 2 months away from not making payroll. So we were raising money from the venture community, and we didn't have a clear sight to closing the round. And we got this cold call from the venture arm of an intelligence, 3-letter intelligence agency, not to be named. And they said, we've been following the company, we love your technology, we are willing to give you $40 million, which was at the time a lot of money for us. But the condition was we pivot to kind of focusing on the surveillance use case.
Right.
And I remember clearly thinking, we may not exist in a couple of months, right? Because we didn't have we didn't have a clear sight to raising money. But I also went back to these core values and that conversation I had with Roz, and it just was not in line with our core values. And so we turned that, opportunity away, and we hunkered down. We were able to raise money from other investors that shared our mission and our, the same core values. And we stuck with that. So we routinely get approached by both the US government, but also other governments around the world. And we just say no. And actually, I don't just do it at the scope of the company. I've really become an evangelist, kind of widened the scope, and we work with organizations like the World Economic Forum and the Partnership on AI Consortium and other, organizations where I'm really adamant that this is not the right use case for this, especially now when there's no regulation. It's not regulated at all.
Oh, right,
so.
yeah. Well, you mentioned lie detection, and that's so fascinating because that could do a lot of good, right? But it's also a slippery slope. Maybe,
exactly.
Right? So you say no to any in that realm.
A few years ago, we had a really heated internal debate at the company where we got approached by, it was kind of a public safety use case. So this, city basically wanted to install cameras everywhere, and they wanted to use our technology to quantify like outlier behavior and suspicious behavior. And we had a debate because yes, there are issues with shootings in schools and public spaces.
Right. Yeah.
And I can see how the technology can be helpful, but I can also see how it could be used to discriminate against people. Right?
Yeah.
And a tiny little bit of bias in the algorithm can just exacerbate the biases already in society. So again, our stance was, nope, this technology is not ready. There's no regulation. We're not going to do that. So we do debate it as a team, but we haven't changed our point of view.
And how does it work with regulation? At some point, do you think it will be regulated? How does that even happen?
There's some regulation around facial recognition, not emotion recognition. So a lot of the work we do, we don't care about who the person is, we just care about your state. Facial recognition is a different, it's the same underlying technology actually, but it's a different use case because it's about identity recognition. So there's some, I guess, emerging regulation around that. But in general, I'm a huge advocate for what I call thoughtful regulation. I would hate for this technology to be completely shut down, because applications like the ones we're doing helping autistic kids or in mental health, there's amazing work being done with this technology to diagnose stress, anxiety, depression, even suicidal intent, which is fascinating because we're spending so much time in front of our machines and people actually hide behind technology.
Right.
But technology can see, if we know how to do this. We have facial and vocal biomarkers of mental health disease. And so I just believe there's huge potential for doing good, but we have to be careful about how we do it.
Absolutely. Well, and can you talk a little bit more about how it's used in the autism space to help kids with recognizing emotions?
Yeah, so the project we started at MIT, like in 2006, basically, individuals on the autism spectrum really struggle with all of this information. And so they avoid it altogether. They won't even look you in the eye when they're interacting with you. So we proposed a grant to the National Science Foundation to essentially build, this was way before Google Glass, but it was a pair of glasses with a little camera, and it could, in real time, process, if I wore the glasses, Katie, it would be reading your facial expressions and giving me real-time feedback. It would say, Katie looks interested. Katie's nodding her head. Katie's bored to death. Like, ask a question. And so we built this technology and partnered with a school in Providence, Rhode Island for autistic children. I will never forget this one moment. There was one teenage boy who had been avoiding, like, I had never made eye-to-eye contact with this young man, but he was using our device, and he had been using it for maybe 6 months or so. And over time, he became more comfortable with this information, and he looked me in the eye, like for the first time ever. And it was just such a magical moment of, I don't know, human connection. So we knew the technology was working. When we spun out Affectiva, it wasn't our main focus, but we partnered with another company, Boston-based company actually, called Brainpower. And they partner with Google Glass, and they've integrated our technology into Google Glass. And I believe they're now deployed in about 400 homes in the US. Huh. And it's pretty awesome. We know that the kids are getting better from a kind of a nonverbal communication standpoint by using these glasses. The key question is, if you take the glasses away, are the kids still able to? Right. Is it a prosthetic device or is it a learning device? And that's the key question they're trying to answer.
And they're still working on that.
They're still working on that.
Well, you mentioned people hiding behind their machines, right? And I think for employers these days, that's a huge thing. They want to establish connections with employees who have been remote for years, and certainly a lot more people are going to be working remote. I mean, do you see this kind of technology having a place in the workplace that could help employers and employees connect somehow?
Yeah, I think there are specific use cases. You have to be very careful because if you deploy it in the wrong way, it can be like Big Brother, and nobody wants that. Right. But as a leader, I would love to know if my distributed team, is engaged or not. Are people stressed? Mm-hmm. Are people depressed? Are people lonely? Are people excited about our mission? And it's so hard. It's a lot easier to walk around an office and get that sense versus when everybody's, again, remote. So I think there are opportunities where, again, like in a meeting setting, you can literally quantify level of engagement of your employees and not use it to punish people, but to intervene, right? Like if I knew that a particular team or team member were just struggling, then that's amazing data I could use to give them a little bit more recognition or a little bit more love.
Right. And does that exist, that you could see someone on a screen and something will tell you that that person in that square is stressed out?
There's a couple of, so Read.ai is one example. Udly is another company I've been tracking. They are coaching managers on how to be more empathetic. So they coach not just managers, but public speakers, and so they tell you, oh, you're not doing enough eye contact, or you're saying a lot. Mm-hmm. So things like that. Because for the very first time ever, we're able to quantify these nonverbal signals, and we can do that in telehealth is another amazing example. Right, yeah. We know that doctors who are more empathetic are less likely to get sued by their patients if something goes wrong. So we can now quantify empathy. We could quantify the interperson dynamics between a doctor and a patient and tie that to patient outcomes.
Quantifiable empathy. Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, and that's such an important thing that we need now more than ever, especially with all the technology and the screens. It's funny that you're using the thing that's taking it away from us to do something good. If that makes any sense.
No, I know. People, I often get into these conversations with people who are like, we just need to spend less time in front of our technology. And sure, there's, I agree, but it's not realistic to just assume that the solution is to do without technology. It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So I would rather fix technology, basically, instead of doing away with it.
And can you also use your technology to in hiring people as well?
Yeah, there are companies that are looking into that. Again, it's quite controversial because, as an example, there are companies that ask candidates to submit a video instead of a Word resume, which I think is actually cool because it's an opportunity for people to tell their story. If it is a customer-facing job, you get to see a person's soft skills, right?
Right.
And then the algorithm, because it's so time-consuming for a human to watch all this video, the algorithms can use a combination of your vocal and facial expressions to bubble sort the videos, and then a human interviewer can watch them in order, basically. So again, the idea is the concern is if there's a little bit of bias in this algorithm, it can discriminate against potential candidates. However, I like to say, but humans are pretty biased in their hiring as well. At least the algorithm isn't biased against a particular gender or age or ethnic group. It's blind to all of that, but humans aren't, so.
Right, yeah. That's true. Well, and can you talk about, as a woman in the tech sector, what kind of challenges you face, especially a woman dealing with emotions?
Yeah,
right.
When we spun out of MIT, Roz and myself did a whole roadshow in Silicon Valley raising capital for the company. And this was back in 2009, and we must have had maybe 30 VC meetings. None of them had any women in the room. Like, they were always primarily older white men. And we were pitching an emotion company. So we were these two women scientists, not a lot of, prior, I guess, company experiences, and we were pitching an emotion company. So it didn't go very well. It was tough. But we persisted, and, we've raised money from VCs like Kleiner Perkins and strategic investors as well. I've also raised money in the last 2 years from the automotive industry. And also not a lot of, diverse investors in the room. But I was adamant this time round to look for investors who at least had a person of color on the partner team and a woman.
And didn't you at first kind of avoid using the word emotion when you were talking?
True, I forgot about that. Yes, we avoided using the word emotions in all of our pitch decks. We went with affect because it's less feminine. It took us a long time to own it, and we coined the term emotion AI. So eventually we got there, but it took years.
And do you find that being keyed into people's facial expressions and being whatever you call it, the certified face reader that you are, or whatever, has helped you succeed? I mean, maybe that's hard to know, but I wonder if you think so.
I like to say I lead with empathy, and I'm really clued into people's emotional experiences, I guess. And I think that was especially important during the pandemic. Because again, you're conversing with people on Zoom, and it's easy to hide what's truly happening in your world. So I was extra clued into people's nonverbals, and especially if there's dissonance between what people are saying and what they're expressing, right? You can ask people how are they feeling, and they'll say, oh, it's great. But then their face doesn't match. I'm like, is it really?
Yeah.
and I start by also being vulnerable myself and very open myself, and I think that encourages people to reciprocate.
Right. Yes, very true. Great. Well, we're out of time, so thank you so much.
Thank you for the conversation. Thanks, everybody.